Good morning, everyone. We know that in this week's Torah portion, we have the building of the first synagogue, the first sanctuary, the first tabernacle. And every single synagogue, including the beautiful synagogue behind me, our synagogue, the Palm Beach Synagogue, are all modeled after the first tabernacle ever built by the Jewish people in the desert. And there are many details, architectural drawings, plans, interior design, about this week's Torah portion that talk about all of the items in the Mishkan. And when you come to Shul tomorrow, I want you to pay attention to all the details, because there are lessons to be learned, very profound lessons from every detail. And to give you one example, what you would think is the most insignificant object in the entire Mishkan are the pegs. Of course, there's the ark, there's the candelabra, there's the altar, there's the gold, the silver, the copper, but then there were pegs made out of copper that kept the walls of the Mishkan intact. And Rashi says there's a dispute how the pegs actually function. One opinion, Rashi says, is that the pegs were weights that were in the bottom of the curtains, which held the so that the walls should not blow in the wind. But the second opinion, Rashi says, is that the pegs were like pegs that were anchored into the earth, so that the wall should remain intact in place and not blow in the wind. And Rashi says, I think it wasn't weights that were hanging on the bottom of the curtains, but they were actually real pegs that were nailed into the earth to keep it attached, intact and in place. And the question is, what is this dispute? Whether the pegs were just weights or whether they were actually nailed into the ground. And Rabbi Moshe Feinstein gives the following answer. He says the question about education is, what does it take to raise a child properly? And there are two views. One view is you have to, as they say, if you want your kids to keep their feet on the ground, you have to put responsibility on their shoulders. If you want your kids to remain anchored and rooted in life and connected, morals, their values, their beliefs, their faith, their traditions, their heritage, you have to weigh them down, so to speak, with education, with values, with principles, with bringing them up properly, so that they will not blow in the wind, so to speak, meaning they will not be blown away or be drifted away from the proper path by other influences, because life is filled with many distractions and other storms that could blow our children, so to speak, in many different directions, and cause them to lose their proper course. So one view is weigh them down with the weightiness of substantive values and education and Torah and guidance and mitzvot. But the second view is that it's not enough to have just weight put upon them. You have to actually anchor them in a proper environment. You have to make sure that your kids remain rooted and connected and live within the Jewish environment and community, so they remain connected to their heritage. And while the truth is both are necessary, there is obviously a very important lesson here, and that is that those pegs represent the message that yes, we have to bring our children up in a proper Jewish community and home environment. Like the pegs, they have to be rooted to their soil. But we most importantly have to give them a substantive, meaningful Jewish education, because ultimately life will take our children in many different directions and different places. But the weightiness of their upbringing will ultimately keep them anchored and make sure that they remain true to their values and teachings of their home and their upbringing. This week's Torah portion is all about charity and giving to the building of the Mishkan. And Sheldon Adelson, of blessed memory, once told this very powerful story. Of course, Sheldon Adelson was worth tens of billions of dollars and gave heavily to Jewish causes. And he told a story that his father was an immigrant from Czechoslovakia, and he was a taxi driver. And his father would come home every day with pockets filled with cash from all of his cab fees. And he said the first thing his father would do was go over to the blue box, J&F charity box, and stuff it with dollar bills. And he said he once said to his father, "Dad, we need the money. Our family is struggling. Why are you putting your money in the box for Israel?" And he said his father looked at him and said, "Shelly, always remember in life, whatever you have, there are always those who have less than you, and you could always help others." He says those words remained with him. And he said when his father passed away, his father never merited to go to Israel. He couldn't afford to. But Sheldon Adelson went to Israel for the first time, and he said, "I wore the same size shoe as my father. So I went to my father's closet, put on his shoes, and boarded a El Al flight to Israel, and traveled the land of Israel to its width and its breadth, wearing my father's shoes, bringing his presence to Israel." And he said, that's why I was always supportive and founding Birthright, because I believe that every Jewish child should have the privilege and the opportunity to experience their own Jewish homeland. And he says, all my philanthropy is inspired by my father putting those dollar bills into the little blue J&F box. So it's what we learn at home, the values that we model for our children, that become the pegs that keep our children anchored in their values and in their Judaism. Let us make sure that as parents, we are good, strong, sturdy pegs to keep our children rooted in their Jewish heritage and values. Have a wonderful Shabbat.